The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the heavy, unspoken silence of a house full of people who have forgotten how to talk to each other, but a clean, peaceful silence. It was the sound of the afternoon sun warming the floorboards, the unfamiliar hum of a refrigerator that was half empty but entirely mine. I held the keys in my palm. They were still warm from the locksmith's hand. Single, shiny brass key on a simple silver ring. It felt heavier than the whole house I had just left behind. My phone buzzed on the chipped Formica countertop, the vibration sharp in the quiet room. The screen lit up with a name I knew better than my own, Turan. It was the fourth call in an hour. I watched the screen, my thumb hovering over the green icon, then moved it to the side, silencing the ring. A small smile touched my lips. It was a quiet, private smile, and it was entirely my own. But 3 weeks ago, that smile felt like an impossible dream. 3 weeks ago, I was still living in their world. A world that had slowly, imperceptibly, shrunk until there was no room left for me at all. 3 weeks earlier, the house on Maple Creek Lane always woke up before the sun. Not with a gentle stirring, but with the relentless hum of the washing machine in the basement, a sound that had become the soundtrack to my life. After Eli passed, I told myself I'd only stay a few months, just long enough to help Turan get her footing. She was juggling the fresh, raw grief of losing her father, toddler twins who moved like a tiny, destructive tornado, and a husband, Niles, who worked unpredictable hours in construction. I had the time, I had the energy, and I had the instinct that told me my daughter needed her mother. So, I packed a few suitcases and moved into their guest room. That was 3 years ago. First, felt good to be needed. It was a purpose that filled the gaping hole Eli had left. I woke at 5 a.m. The floorboards cold beneath my bare feet. I'd pack school lunches, turkey on whole wheat for Leo, cream cheese for Theo, both with the crusts cut off just so. I rotated loads of laundry, sorting tiny socks and grass-stained jeans with a practiced efficiency. I took my pension, the modest sum Eli and I had carefully saved, and I slotted it into the cracks, the little fissures their paychecks couldn't quite reach. Groceries when Niles's overtime fell through. The electric bill that was always higher than they expected. The daycare deposits that seemed to double overnight. I paid without fuss, writing checks from my own account. That's what family does, I told myself, again and again, until the words felt true. But as the months bled into years, the rhythm of the house changed. Thank yous, which were once a warm blanket on a cold day, thinned out until they were non-existent. The favors I offered became expectations I was meant to fulfill. The space I occupied, both physically and emotionally, grew smaller. Turan stopped asking if I'd join them for dinner. She just assumed I would eat later. After the boys were in bed and the kitchen was clean, twins, Leo and Theo, started calling Betty, Niles's mother, their real grandma, even though she lived across town and only showed up for birthdays with a store-bought cake and a camera. She was the grandma for photos. I was the grandma for fevers and scraped knees. I tried to keep Eli's memory alive, mentioning him now and then. Your grandpa would have loved watching you two play soccer, I'd say, only to be met with a tight, uncomfortable silence, as if I'd brought up an old, canceled TV show no one watched anymore. Turan would change the subject. Niles would suddenly find something interesting on his phone. So, I learned to keep my memories to myself, tucking them away like old photographs in a dusty album. Till I stayed. I learned to cook the meals they preferred. Bland chicken and pasta, setting aside my own love for spicy curries and garlic. I adjusted to the thermostat they kept locked at a chilly 68 degrees, wearing my thickest cardigan even in the house. I ignored the sideways glances from Turan when I watched my crime shows a little too loud in the living room after everyone else had gone to bed. I told myself I was lucky to be close to my grandchildren, to watch them grow. I told myself this was what late life looked like for a woman like me, useful, if not cherished. The two were not the same thing. A fact I was learning with each passing day. My world had become a series of quiet, thankless tasks. The clean folded laundry that magically appeared in their drawers. The refrigerator that was always stocked. The clean floors that never showed the grime of two active little boys. I was the engine of the house, humming quietly in the background, unnoticed until a part started to fail. One Tuesday afternoon, while dusting the living room, I picked up the silver frame on the mantel. It held Eli's old pocket watch, the one his father had given him. I ran my thumb over the cool, smooth glass, the way he used to. My heart ached with a familiar, dull pain. Niles walked in, pulling off his work boots by the door. He saw me holding the watch. "Hey, Clara," he said. His voice tired. He gestured toward it with his chin. "You know, we should probably put that away somewhere safe. In a box or something. It's just collecting dust up there." The words caught in my throat. Collecting dust. He wasn't being cruel. He was just thoughtless, oblivious. This watch wasn't just an object collecting dust. It was a piece of my husband. It was the steady tick-tock I'd fallen asleep to for 40 years. It was the memory of his warm, calloused hands. "It's fine right here," I managed to say, my voice thinner than I intended. He just shrugged, already halfway to the kitchen, his mind on dinner. "All right. Just a thought." I placed the watch back on the mantel carefully, but its position felt different. It felt less like a centerpiece and more like something I was hiding, something I had to protect from the very people I was here to care for. That small exchange was a stone dropping into a deep well. I couldn't see the bottom, but I could hear the ripple it created. A silent tremor that warned me something was about to break. I just didn't know it would be me. The feeling of being an outsider in my own family's home grew heavier in the days that followed. It was in the way Tarun would have long, whispered phone calls with her friends, her voice dropping conspiratorially if I walked into the room. It was in the way Niles would bring home takeout for himself and Tarun, forgetting to ask if I wanted anything, leaving me to warm up leftovers. It was in the children's artwork taped to the refrigerator drawings of Mommy, Daddy, Leo, Theo, and a smiling stick figure they labeled Grandma Betty. There was never a stick figure for me. My life was lived in the margins. I was the first one up and the last one to bed. My social life had dwindled to my Thursday morning coffee with my best friend, Camille. It was the 1 hour a week I felt seen. Camille, a retired teacher with eyes that missed nothing, would listen as I recounted the small, daily slights. "They're just stressed, Clara," she'd say, trying to be diplomatic. "Raising twins is no joke." "I know," I'd reply, stirring my tea. "That's why I'm there. To help." But even as I said it, the words sounded hollow. Was I helping? Or was I enabling? Was I a support system? Or just a convenience? The line had become so blurred. I couldn't see it anymore. Then came last Tuesday night. The final stone that would trigger the avalanche. I was in the laundry room. The warm, clean scent of fabric softener filling the small space. It was my sanctuary. In a way. A place of order and completion. I was folding Theo's dinosaur socks, matching the tiny pairs with a quiet satisfaction. It was nearly 10 o'clock. The house was finally quiet. The door creaked open. Tarun stood there, holding her phone in front of her like a shield. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She wouldn't meet my gaze. She was looking at a spot on the wall just over my shoulder. "Mom," she said, her voice unnaturally flat. I looked up, a tiny sock still in my hand. "Is everything all right, honey?" She took a breath, a sharp, deliberate intake of air. "Niles and I have been talking. His parents, they're going to be moving in." I blinked, processing the words. "Betty and Richard? Here." They were nice enough. But Richard had a bad back and Betty complained about everything. Oh. Well. That's nice. Are they visiting for a while? I asked, picturing a week of polite, strained conversation. No, Mom, Tarun said, and her eyes finally met mine for a fraction of a second. They were cold, determined, not visiting, moving in, for good. The little dinosaur sock fell from my hand. I felt a laugh bubble up in my chest, a disbelieving, hysterical sound. Moving in? Tarun, where would they even stay? This house isn't that big. We've figured it out, she said, her arms crossing over her chest. A defensive posture. They'll take the master bedroom. We'll move into the boys' room. And the boys can take the guest room. The guest room. My room. The room where my clothes were hanging in the closet. Where Eli's picture sat on my nightstand. The air in the tiny laundry room suddenly felt thick. Unbreathable. I waited for her to finish. To explain where I fit into this new equation. But she didn't. The silence stretched. Filled only by the low hum of the dryer. And me? I finally whispered. The words feeling foreign on my tongue. Tarun looked away again. Her gaze fixed on the lint trap. We'll need the space. Mom. You'll need to find your own place. We figured by the end of the month would be enough time. That's when I laughed out loud. I couldn't help it. The sheer absurdity of it hit me like a physical blow. Sounded like a bad sitcom line. A cruel joke. I had given up my life. My savings. My home. To keep this family afloat. I had poured 3 years of my existence into these walls. And now I was being evicted with the casual indifference one might show a renter who was late with the rent. But Tarun's face didn't soften. There was no smile. No hint that this was some terrible misunderstanding. Her expression was flat. Her jaw set. She meant it. Every single word. My laughter died in my throat, replaced by a cold, hollowing dread. I bent down slowly, my joints creaking in protest, and picked up the fallen sock. My movements were deliberate, measured, as if slowing down time might somehow delay the reality crashing down around me. I placed the sock in the basket with its perfectly matched partner. Then I stood up, smoothed the front of my cardigan, and walked past her out of the laundry room. I didn't say a word. There was nothing to say. Arguing felt beneath me. Pleading felt pathetic. My silence seemed to unnerve her more than any outburst would have. Mom. It's for the best. She called after me. Her voice suddenly laced with a frantic, defensive edge. His mom has prediabetes and his dad's got those back issues. They need to be somewhere stable. With family to look after them. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. As if I hadn't been the one getting up at dawn to shovel the snow so Niles wouldn't have to strain his back. As if I hadn't been the one cooking healthy, low-sugar meals from scratch to keep everyone's health in check. As if I hadn't kept this entire house running when both she and Niles were barely holding it together after the twins were born. Had she forgotten the nights I walked the floors with a colicky baby in each arm so she could get a few hours of sleep? Had she forgotten the money I'd given her? No questions asked. When Niles was between jobs. It seemed she had. Or worse, she hadn't forgotten. She just didn't care. You've had a good run here, Mom, she said. Her voice softer now, as if that made the words less cruel. It's just time. It's time. Like I was a houseguest who had overstayed my welcome. Like my 3 years of service had been some extended vacation I should be grateful for. Like the life I had given up the chance to buy my own small condo. To travel with Camille. To live my final years on my own terms, was nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. I nodded slowly, not turning to look at her. Right? I said. The single word feeling like a betrayal of the hurricane raging inside me. It's time. I walked into the living room without another word. My eyes were drawn to the mantelpiece, to the spot where our family photo used to sit. It was taken the summer we all went to Lake Geneva, a few months before Eli got sick. His arm was wrapped securely around my shoulder, his familiar smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. The boys were toddlers, sticky with popsicle juice and grinning for the camera. It was a perfect moment, frozen in time. But the photo was gone. In its place, propped up prominently, was a framed picture of Niles as a child, standing stiffly beside a boy I didn't recognize. The frame was new, polished, gold-edged thing that glittered under the lamplight. It looked so out of place, so deliberate. A clear and brutal statement. The old guard was out. The new one was already being installed. I stood there staring at it, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. When I finally turned around, Taran had already disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone with the ghosts of the family I thought I had. The shift began the very next morning. It was subtle at first, a series of small, calculated gestures designed to make me feel like a stranger in what was, until last night, my home. Taran knocked lightly on my bedroom door. A hesitant rap I hadn't heard in years. It was the knock of a person asking permission to enter, not the familiar, casual entrance of a daughter. She stepped in before I could answer. A bright, plastic smile stretched across her face and a black Sharpie in her hand. "Hey," she said, her cheerfulness jarringly false. "Do you mind starting to pack up some of your non-essentials? Just so we can start making room. I figured the office closet could hold some of your boxes temporarily." Non-essentials. I looked around the room. Everything in it was mine. The hand-stitched quilt on the bed, a wedding gift from my own mother. The bookshelf Eli had built for me, filled with my favorite novels. The sturdy reading lamp on the dresser that I'd had since college. To her, these were just things taking up space. Non-essentials. But to me, they were the fragments of my life. So, I just nodded and said, "Sure." Arguing would only prolong the agony. Later that afternoon, she poked her head into the kitchen while I was prepping dinner. The familiar scent of garlic and onions was just beginning to fill the air. "Also, quick thing," she said, wrinkling her nose slightly. "Beth's allergic to a lot of stuff. Strong smells can really trigger her sinuses. Maybe go light on the curry and the garlic for a while?" I paused, the knife still in my hand, hovering over a clove of garlic. For 3 years, I had cooked. For 3 years, no one had complained about my food. In fact, Niles often said my pot roast was better than his own mother's. But now, even before she arrived, Beth's preferences were taking precedence. My kitchen was no longer my own. I stirred the pot of simmering tomato sauce slowly, watching the bubbles rise to the surface. "Of course," I said, my voice as bland as the food she was now requesting. That night, as I was carrying a basket of clean towels to the linen closet, I heard them talking in the living room. I paused at the edge of the hallway, hidden from view by the half-wall. "We'll put Beth and Richard in the master," Taran was saying, her voice crisp and decisive. "It has the attached bathroom, so it'll be easier for them. We can have the downstairs guest room for now." There was a pause. Then Niles's voice, hesitant and low. "What about your mom?" Another pause. This one was longer, heavier. Then Taran's voice, clipped and casual, as if discussing what to do with an old piece of furniture. "She can go wherever. She'll figure it out. She's resourceful." A short, bitter laugh. "Maybe she can stay with Aunt Carol for a bit." Aunt Carol, my sister, who lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Florida and had her own health problems. The suggestion was not only impractical, it was insulting. It was a way of brushing me off, of making me someone else's problem. Niles didn't respond. He didn't defend me. He didn't suggest an alternative. His silence was his consent. I crept back to my room, the basket of towels forgotten in the hallway. My chest felt tight, like I'd inhaled something sharp. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the picture of Eli on my nightstand. His kind eyes seemed to look back at me, full of a sympathy I could no longer find in the faces of my own family. "Oh, Eli," I whispered into the quiet room. "What would you do?" But I knew what he would do. He would tell me I deserved better. He would tell me to stand up for myself. He never would have tolerated seeing me treated this way. The thought brought a fresh wave of grief. But underneath it, something else was stirring. Tiny, hard ember of anger. In the days that followed, the house began to transform around me. The groceries I bought were slowly replaced. The dark roast coffee I liked vanished, replaced by a mild blend Beth preferred. The fruit bowl, usually overflowing with the apples and bananas I bought for the boys, was now filled with prepackaged snacks and processed foods. The thermostat was set to a frigid 66 degrees, and when I shivered, no one offered me a blanket. Dinner. The seating arrangement rearranged itself. An empty chair, Beth's future chair, was placed beside the boys, as if anticipating her arrival. Mine was quietly pushed to the corner of the table, untouched, a clear signal that my presence was temporary. The boys, sensing the shift in the household's atmosphere, grew distant. They stopped asking me for bedtime stories. When I asked why, Tarun said, "They're getting too old for that, Mom." But I knew the truth. They were being coached, gently nudged away from me. I started spending my evenings alone in my room, eating dinner off a tray I balanced on my lap, watching old home movies on my small television with the volume turned low. I watched footage of Tarun's first steps, of her high school graduation, of her wedding day. I saw the younger, happier version of my daughter, the one whose eyes lit up when I entered a room. I searched for that girl in the woman who now passed me in the hallway with a polite, distant nod. But I couldn't find her. I made a habit of walking through the house late at night, barefoot and silent. After everyone was asleep, it was the only time it felt like mine anymore. I'd flick on the porch light, check that the doors were locked, fold a stray blanket left on the sofa. Little routines, like muscle memory from a life I was still living but no longer invited to. It was during these lonely, nocturnal wanderings that I started paying attention. Really paying attention. Not just to the emotional coldness, but to the physical objects around me. I started making a mental inventory, not just of what I owned, but of what I was no longer welcome to use. And more importantly, what I had provided. The air purifier humming quietly in the corner of the living room I bought that last spring when Theo's allergies were acting up. The plush rug in the foyer that Tarun had admired in a catalog I'd bought it for her birthday. The stand mixer on the kitchen counter. The brand new dishwasher. The heavy-duty washer and dryer in the basement. My pension had paid for them all. Each object was a silent testament to my care. Quiet, invisible record of service. And soon, they would all belong to Beth and Richard. The thought made the anger in my chest burn a little hotter. The first Thursday of the month was my lifeline. It was my standing coffee date with Camille at Finch's Cafe. A cozy little place downtown with mismatched chairs and the best cinnamon scones in Ohio. This time, however, the familiar comfort of the cafe felt distant. I hadn't said much since sitting down, just stared into the milky swirl of my tea, the steam warming a face that felt frozen. Camille, with her sharp, intelligent eyes, watched me across the table. She let the silence hang for a long moment, giving me the space I needed. Finally, she placed her spoon down with a soft clink. "They're not easing you out, Clara," she said, her voice gentle but firm, cutting through the fog in my head. "They've already erased you." I let out a soft laugh, more of a sad breath than a sound. "I know," I said, my voice hoarse. "But hearing you say it out loud, it hits different." It made it real. Took the vague, swirling hurt inside me and gave it a name. Erasure. "So," she said, leaning forward, her gaze intense, "what are you going to do about it?" The question hung in the air between us. What was I going to do? Part of me, the tired, grieving part, just wanted to pack my bags, find a small, quiet apartment, and fade away. But another part, the part that still remembered the strong, capable woman I was before I became just mom or grandma, was stirring. The ember of anger I'd felt a few nights ago was beginning to glow. I don't know yet, I admit it, but I can't just disappear. Good, Camille said, nodding with satisfaction, because the Clara Evans I know is not a doormat. Her words clung to me like steam all the way home. They followed me as I walked through the front door, past the new, gold-framed photo of Niles, and up the stairs to my room. That night, after the house had settled into its usual quiet, I didn't turn on the television. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled the old, metal lockbox out from under my bed. It was a habit from another lifetime, from when Eli was alive and we managed our finances together. He was the big-picture guy. I was the one who kept the records. Inside wasn't a laptop or a tablet. I've never been a woman who trusted the digital world with important things. Inside were neatly organized folders, a leather-bound ledger, and a small, solar-powered calculator. I lifted the ledger and placed it on my lap. The cover was worn smooth from years of use. This wasn't about measuring love in dollars and cents. It was about something else. It was about seeing the truth in black and white. With a deep breath, I opened the ledger to a fresh page. My handwriting, once a fluid cursive, was a bit shakier now, but the letters were still clear and precise. I started with the big things, the purchases I could remember easily. I pulled out a folder labeled household appliances. The receipt for the washer and dryer was right on top, dated 2 years ago, from a week when the old set had broken down mid-flu season. Tarun had been frantic. Niles was out of town. I had gone to the appliance store the next morning and paid in full. $1. $250. I wrote it down. Next, the dining room table. I remembered the day I bought it so clearly. Camille had come with me. We'd spent hours measuring the space, comparing wood finishes, making sure it had enough leaf extensions for Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners. That table had hosted every single birthday party, every holiday meal, every late-night school project since I'd moved in. I had paid with a check. The carbon copy was tucked into a manila envelope. $800. I wrote it down. I worked my way through the house in my mind, my pen scratching steadily across the paper. The air purifier for Theo's allergies, $200. The Instant Pot that was a Christmas gift to myself because no one else had thought to get me one that year, $120. The standing lamp in the corner of the living room, $95. The small, non-slip rug in the foyer that I bought after I nearly fell on the slick tile one rainy morning, $60. Each item had a story, a reason, a quiet record of my service. Then I moved on to the recurring expenses. I pulled out a separate folder filled with bank statements and utility bills I'd kept out of habit. My pension was direct deposited every month, and nearly every month, a significant portion of it flowed right back out and into this house. I started a new column in the ledger. Utilities, groceries, daycare support. I didn't have every single receipt, but I had enough to see the pattern. An extra $200 here for the gas bill during a cold snap. Another $400 there for a month of groceries when Tarun's paycheck was short. Checks written directly to Tarun for extras, swimming lessons, new sneakers, co-pays for doctor's visits. The numbers piled up, page after page. They weren't extravagant amounts, but they were steady, relentless, quiet dollars that kept this family running, unacknowledged and unthanked. By the time I reached the most recent statement, the house was completely dark and the only sound was the ticking of the clock on my nightstand. I picked up my little calculator. My fingers, stiff with arthritis, slowly punched in the numbers. I added up each column, then added the totals together. I checked the math twice. When I finished, I stared at the final number at the bottom of the page. It seemed to pulse in the dim light. $26,450. I leaned back in my chair, the ledger heavy on my lap. Over $26,000. From a fixed income. From the money Eli and I had scrimped and saved for our own peaceful retirement. A retirement he never got to see. A wave of cold, hard clarity washed over me. This wasn't about being hurt anymore. It wasn't about Tarun's stress or Niles's passivity. It was about being used. It was about being treated like a resource to be drained. And now that a new, more desirable resource in the form of 2 live-in babysitters and caregivers for Tarun and Niles in their old age was available, I was being discarded. I was an inconvenience. I gently placed the ledger on my nightstand and opened another drawer. I pulled out a thick, worn manila folder. The label on it, written in my younger, more hopeful handwriting, said Condo Fund. Inside was the paperwork I'd collected years ago, just after Eli passed. I was thinking about buying a small, sunny condo in a 55-plus community a few towns over. I'd had a deposit ready. The sales agent's business card was still clipped to the front page. I had been days away from signing the papers, and then the phone had rung. I could still hear Tarun's voice, choked with tears. The twins' daycare cost had doubled overnight. Niles was between jobs. They were going to lose their spot. Could I help? Just for a little while? I'd wired the entire deposit to her bank account the next day. Every last penny. She had cried on the phone. A torrent of grateful, relieved sobs. Oh, Mom. Thank you. Promise. I'll pay you back every cent. Promise. That was nearly 3 years ago. The promise had evaporated, forgotten as quickly as it was made. I closed the folder and held it in my lap, the edges soft from handling. My hands didn't tremble. Not anymore. Something inside me had shifted, solidified. The grief and hurt were still there, but they were now encased in a shell of cold, hard resolve. This wasn't about space anymore. It wasn't about Beth's allergies or spare rooms or meal planning. It was about dignity. It was about reclaiming the years they had taken for granted. I stood up and walked over to the small desk in the corner. I reached into a drawer, took out a pen and a fresh sticky notepad. My mind was sharp, clear. A plan was beginning to form. Quiet, methodical strategy. I scribbled 3 lines on the small yellow square. Find the paperwork. Get it in writing. Track it all. I peeled the note off the pad and stuck it to the edge of my dresser mirror, right where I would see it first thing in the morning. It looked like a warning. Or maybe, it looked like a promise. The next morning, I waited until Niles had left for work and the boys were outside riding their bikes in the driveway. Tarun was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of something that smelled suspiciously like it came from a box. She was humming along to the radio, seemingly unbothered by the emotional grenade she had detonated in my life. I stood just beyond the counter, my hands folded neatly in front of me, like a visitor waiting to be acknowledged. She didn't look up. Tarun, I said, my voice even and calm. She glanced up, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes before she masked it with a polite smile. Yeah, Mom. What's up? I took a breath. I've been thinking about what you said, about me leaving by the end of the month. Right? She said, turning her attention back to the pot. Stir. I have a question for you. I continued, refusing to be dismissed. Where? Exactly. Do you expect me to go? She didn't look up this time. Her shoulders tensed. I don't know. Mom, you're smart. You'll figure it out. The casual cruelty of it stole my breath for a second. You'll figure it out. As if I were a teenager she was kicking out. Not the mother who had given her everything. Niles's parents really need the stability right now, she added, as if that explained everything. As if their needs automatically canceled out my own. They're getting older. They need care. I almost laughed. I almost listed all the things I had done. All the care I had given. But I didn't. I held it in. It wasn't the time. She wouldn't hear it anyway. She finally turned to face me, leaning back against the counter. Her arms crossed. It was the same defensive posture from the other night. "You've had a good run here," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "It's time." The same words again. "It's time." I nodded slowly, letting the silence settle between us. Then I turned and walked away without another word. I had my answer, and she had just sealed her fate. I walked into the living room and saw it again. The polished gold frame on the mantel. The picture of Niles as a boy I didn't know. Seemed to mock me. A gleaming monument to my own obsolescence. But this time, I didn't feel the sting of tears. I didn't feel the hollow ache of grief. I felt a profound, chilling calm. It was the calm of a decision made. The calm of a path chosen. I stood there staring at it, not as a heartbroken mother, but as a strategist studying a map of enemy territory. When I turned, Tarun had already gone upstairs, her footsteps light, unburdened. That night, the house buzzed with a new kind of energy. It was the energy of anticipation, but none of it was for me. I could hear Tarun on the phone in the other room, her voice bright and animated as she talked to her mother-in-law. "Yes, Beth, we'll get the allergen-free mattress covers. No, Court, we'll make sure there's no down pillows. Richard will love the recliner we picked out." They were building a nest, feathering it with considerations and comforts that had never once been extended to me. I couldn't bear to be in the house. I took my cup of chamomile tea and slipped out the back door into the garage. I sat on the cool concrete step beside the dryer, the one I had insisted they buy when the old one became a fire hazard. The air was cool and smelled of gasoline and cut grass. It was a neutral space, a space without memories or expectations. I pulled the small, leather-bound notebook from my sweater pocket, the one I'd kept since Eli passed. It was mostly filled with my thoughts on grief, on loneliness, on memory. But tonight, I turned to a fresh, clean page. I uncapped my pen and, under the dim glow of the single bare bulb, I wrote down 2 lines. "This is no longer my home. But it's not theirs yet, either." I closed the book and tucked it back in my pocket. The words felt true. I was a ghost in this house, but a ghost with unfinished business. Then, I stood up and opened the tall metal cabinet above the washing machine. It was where I kept warranties, instruction manuals, and important receipts. I started making a list. Not in my head this time. A real, tangible list. I started with the washer and dryer right in front of me. I remembered the invoice was still in my email inbox. A digital confirmation from 2 years ago. The next morning, while Tarun was in the shower, I went into the small office, turned on the old, slow desktop computer, and printed it out. I folded the paper neatly and placed it in a new manila folder I'd found in the desk drawer. In pencil, I wrote on the tab, "Personal Assets." Next was the dining table. My eyes lingered on it as I passed through the dining room. Every scratch, every water ring told a story. A story of family meals I had cooked, of birthday cakes I had served, of homework I had helped with. But sentiment wouldn't help me now. The carbon copy of the check I'd used to pay for it was in my old checkbook register, tucked away in my desk. I retrieved it, the thin, yellowed paper feeling substantial in my hand. I placed it in the folder behind the first receipt. The work gave me a sense of purpose, a quiet focus that drowned out the hurt. I moved through the house like an appraiser, my eyes lingering on things I'd stopped truly seeing long ago. The air purifier came next. I found the charge on a credit card statement from last April, during the height of allergy season when Tarun had complained about the boys coughing at night. I printed the statement, highlighting the line item. It went into the folder. The Instant Pot. That one was easy. It was an Amazon purchase. A few clicks and another receipt was printed. That Christmas, Taran and Niles had given me a generic gift set of scented lotions that I was allergic to. The Instant Pot was my gift to myself. A silent acknowledgement that if I wanted something nice, I'd have to provide it myself. My investigation became a quiet obsession over the next few days. I cross-checked credit card statements, store accounts, and PayPal receipts. I unearthed warranties with my name and address on them. The numbers from my ledger now had corresponding proof. The narrative was clear, undeniable. I was not a guest. I was an investor. An unpaid, unappreciated investor who was about to liquidate her assets. By the time the boys were in bed on Thursday night and the hallway lights were dimmed, I had gathered 3 thick folders worth of receipts and printed records. They represented thousands of dollars in 3 years of my life. I slid them under my mattress, tucked deep in the corner where no one would find them. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling for a long while. The low murmur of Taran and Niles's television drifting up from downstairs. They were oblivious, living in a home they didn't realize was built on a foundation I had paid for. A foundation that was about to be pulled out from under them. Just before midnight, I did something that made my heart beat a little faster. I took out my phone, opened a private browser window, and searched for short-term rentals in the next town over. I found a small, furnished studio apartment available for weekly rental. It wasn't much, but it had a kitchenette and a door that locked. I booked it for the upcoming weekend. When the form asked for my name, I hesitated for a second, then typed in Clara Maeve. Maeve was my mother's name. Using it felt like putting on a disguise, a layer of protection. It was just a test. I told myself. A trial run. Nothing more. But as I received the confirmation email, I knew it was more. It was the first step out the door. I waited until Friday. It was the perfect day. Taran had a work retreat that would keep her out of the house until late evening. Niles was scheduled to take the twins to their afternoon karate class, and then swing by his parents' house to help them with some packing. That gave me a window. Clean. 4-hour window. It was long enough. If I stuck to the plan. At 9 a.m., I drove our old family minivan, the one that was technically mine but that everyone used, and parked it a few blocks away. I didn't want it in the driveway. Then I walked back to the house and sent a simple text to Camille. Ready. She arrived 10 minutes later, pulling her sensible Subaru into the driveway. She got out of the car, her sleeves already rolled up, a steely look in her eyes. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She just gave me a firm nod. Where do we start? My room, I said. The non-essentials. We moved with a quiet, methodical efficiency that felt like a military operation. There were no slamming drawers, no dragging chairs across the floor. Just the soft sound of measured steps and the zip of duffel bags. We started with my closet, packing my linens, my winter coats, the old sewing machine tucked behind a humidifier. Next came the living room. I carefully rolled up the plush rug I'd bought, the one that had warmed the cold hardwood floor. Camille boxed up the books from the shelves, the ones that were mine. She paused when she found a collection of Robert Frost's poems with Eli's familiar handwriting in the margins, then passed it to me without a word. I clutched it to my chest for a moment before placing it carefully in a box labeled fragile. The kitchen took the longest. Every pan, every spatula, every plate and bowl I had purchased to replace their chipped, mismatched collection over the years it all went. The spice rack I had meticulously organized. The high-quality knives I had bought myself because I couldn't stand their dull ones anymore. The coffee maker that brewed the perfect cup. We wrapped them in newspaper and packed them securely. The shelves were left clean but eerily empty, except for a few stained plastic mugs and a cracked colander. And yes, I took the Instant Pot. Especially the Instant Pot. We left the heavy dining table for last. I wiped it down one final time with a soft cloth, my hand gliding over the smooth wood. I thought of the laughter, the arguments, the spilled milk that had happened at this table. A pang of sadness hit me, sharp and unexpected. Camille must have seen it in my face. She put a hand on my arm. You're taking the memories with you, Clara. The table is just wood. I nodded, grateful for her strength. We disassembled the leaf extensions and wrapped the chairs in old blankets Niles kept in the garage for covering furniture. As we worked, Camille shook her head in disbelief. They're going to walk in here and think the house was robbed. No, I said, my voice steady as I tightened a strap around a chair leg. They're going to walk in here and see what was left when I was gone. By noon, the minivan was packed to the ceiling. It sagged under the weight of my reclaimed life. I gave the house one last walkthrough, not to reminisce, but to ensure every corner I'd touched was accounted for. The place looked barren, stripped of its warmth and personality. It was just a house now, no longer a home. Then I sat down at the empty kitchen counter, the one I had wiped clean 1,000 times. I took out a single sheet of plain white paper from my purse. I typed it the night before on the old desktop, printed it at the library while I was running errands, and signed it in a clear, steady blue ink. It wasn't a letter. It was a statement, a final invoice for 3 years of my life. I placed it in the center of the counter, anchoring it with the salt shaker, one of the few things I had left behind. They would be sure to see it there. The note was brutally simple. What I paid for, I took. What you threw away, you can keep. There was no love, Mom. No signature. Just the truth. Camille and I drove the overloaded minivan across town to the short-term rental complex. It was a drab, 2-story building called the Oakwood Suites, though I didn't see a single oak tree. The studio I had rented was on the ground floor. It was tiny, with chipped countertops and a heater that rattled ominously. But the lock on the door clicked shut under my key. The thermostat, old and manual, responded to my touch when I nudged it up to a comfortable 72 degrees. The silence that filled the small space was mine. It belonged to me. After we unloaded the last box, Camille gave me a fierce hug. You call me if you need anything, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Anything at all. And I mean it. I know, I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. Thank you, Camille. I couldn't have done this without you. Yes, you could have, she replied, pulling back to look me in the eye. It just would have taken you a little longer to lift the damn table. We shared a small, weary laugh. After she left, I stood alone in the middle of my new, temporary life. Boxes were stacked against the walls, filled with the physical evidence of my past. That night, I didn't bother unpacking. I just made a cup of tea in my own mug, the one with the faded blue flowers, in a kitchen that didn't resent me. I sat on the lumpy sofa bed and wrote a new list in my notebook. This time, it was a list of things I wouldn't miss. The cold drafts, the sound of Niles's work boots clomping on the floor above my head at 5 a.m., the taste of bland, garlic-free food, the feeling of being invisible, the silence that wasn't peaceful, but empty. I slept better that night than I had in 3 years. The next morning, I began the process of building a new life. The first step was practical. The locksmith, a thin young man named Jonah who smelled faintly of coffee and metal, arrived early. I had called him the day before. He was scheduled to change the locks at my new apartment. He worked quickly and efficiently. When he handed me the new set of keys, I held them in my palm for a long moment. They felt warm, real. They were the keys to my own front door. No one else had a copy. All set, ma'am, he said politely. Thank you, Jonah, I said, handing him the cash I had set aside. Felt good to be in control, to be the one making the decisions and paying the bills for my own security. That same afternoon, I signed the lease, a real 6-month lease. The property manager, a woman with a kind, tired face, walked me through the one-page document. There was no fuss, no hidden language. Just a monthly rent I could easily cover. Especially now that I wasn't subsidizing a family of 4. I set up an automatic payment from a small savings account Tarun didn't know existed. I'd started it right after Eli died. A secret little nest egg I called my runaway fund. Back then, I'd squirrel away small deposits here and there, never knowing what I was saving for. Now I did. I was saving for this. For my freedom. That evening, as I was carefully unpacking my dishes into the small kitchenette cupboards, there was a knock on the door. I hesitated, my body automatically tensing, bracing for a reprimand or a need that wasn't mine. It was a conditioned response, one I would have to unlearn. I opened the door a few inches. A woman with a cloud of vibrant white hair and a warm, crinkly smile stood there, holding a small tin wrapped in a ribbon. "Hi there," she said, her voice a cheerful, grandmotherly alto. "Name's Leota. Unit 3B. Right across the hall. I saw you moving in and figured you could use a little welcome." She held out the tin. "Chocolate chip cookies. My grandson says they're the best west of the Mississippi." I was so taken aback by the simple, unconditional kindness that I was speechless for a moment. "Oh," I managed. "Thank you. That's so thoughtful. I'm Clara." "A pleasure, Clara," Leota said. "Listen, a few of us gals play cards on Thursday nights down in the rec room. Nothing serious. Just a little gin rummy and a lot of bad coffee. You should come. 7 o'clock. I nodded, surprised at how quickly the word yes came out of my mouth. I'd like that very much. An hour later, I was sitting at a wobbly folding table with Leota and 3 other women, all widows, 1 divorced, all retired. We were laughing over terrible hands and swapping stories about our lives. Nobody asked me to clean up. Nobody talked over me. Nobody expected anything from me but my presence. For the first time in years, I was not a function. I was a person. I walked back to my apartment with a strange looseness in my chest. Like a knot I didn't even know was there had finally been undone. The apartment was still cluttered with boxes, but it didn't feel chaotic. It felt full of potential. I made myself some scrambled eggs on my small electric stove, sat cross-legged on the futon, and ate my simple dinner in the quiet glow of a lamp I had chosen for myself. The old house on Maple Creek Lane was still echoing somewhere in the back of my mind, but its grip had loosened. Its power over me was fading. I slept with the door locked, the windows cracked just an inch to let in the cool night air, and the new keys tucked safely under my pillow. It wasn't out of fear. It was a new habit, a comforting ritual to remind myself that I was safe. I was secure. And I was home. A habit I was finally ready to embrace. The first call came on Saturday, at 9:13 a.m. I had just finished my first cup of coffee, the good, strong dark roast I had missed so much. I saw Tarun's name flash on the screen and I let it ring. I knew that tone of voice she would have, the tight, clip, annoyed sound of someone whose world had been disrupted. She didn't leave a voicemail. She probably thought I had simply forgotten my phone somewhere. The second call came 20 minutes later. This time, she left a message. I listened to it with a strange sense of detachment, like I was listening to a character in a radio play. "Hey, Mom," her voice began, strained. "Just wondering if you maybe took more than you meant to when you packed your things. The fridge is completely empty. And did you mean to take all the pots, too? Call me back." By noon, she'd called 5 times. The 6th call came at 1:45 p.m. With a voicemail that started tight and unraveled quickly into panic. "Mom, where are you? The twins are crying because they can't find their dinosaur cereal and the stove's acting weird. Niles is trying to fix it, but he says it's not the same without that big pot you always use. Where's the Instant Pot? And did you really take the washer and dryer? The laundry basket is overflowing. This isn't funny." Yet, run. I had. I was sitting at my little fold-out table, drinking my second cup of tea from a cup I didn't have to share, when voicemail number 8 came in. Mom, come on. This is a lot. We didn't expect everything to be gone. We thought you'd just take your clothes. Could you at least drop off some of the kitchen stuff? The boys need to eat. I mean, seriously, who takes the air purifier? Someone who bought it. Thought, taking a slow, satisfying sip of my tea. The air in my apartment was clean, purified, and entirely my own. By the 10th call, the sharp edge in Tarun's voice had been sanded down by desperation. It was replaced with something else. A wheedling, pleading tone I hadn't heard since she was a teenager trying to borrow the car. Look, the voicemail began, her voice cracking slightly. Maybe I didn't say things the right way. I was stressed. Niles's parents aren't even helping yet. They just came over to supervise and brought more boxes of their junk. It's just added more chaos. I didn't mean for you to feel unwanted. Unwanted. It was such a small word for such a cavernous feeling. But she was wrong. It wasn't about how I felt. It was about what I'd finally accepted. I was not a member of their family in any meaningful way. I was unpaid staff, and the staff had quit. Call number 11 came after dark. She sounded tired, defeated. I almost felt a flicker of pity, but I stamped it out. Pity was a luxury I could no longer afford. Mom, please, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean for it to come out like that. Please just come back. The boys keep asking where you are. Theo asked if you were mad at him. I didn't think you'd actually leave. And there it was. The crux of it all. She didn't think I'd actually leave. She had pushed and pushed, taken and taken, assuming my love was a bottomless well, my presence an immovable object. She had gambled on my devotion, and she had lost. The final call of the night, the 12th, came just before 10 o'clock. It was from Niles. His voice was gruff, uncomfortable. Clara, Tarun's really upset. Things are a mess here. We can talk about this. Just call us back. Okay. I watched the phone screen fade to black and then, with a sense of finality, I turned the ringer off completely. I walked over to my small window and looked out at the street below. A car passed, its headlights cutting a soft yellow path through the darkness. The world was quiet, still, completely unbothered by the chaos unraveling in that house across town. I was no longer at the center of their storm. I was in the calm, quiet eye of my own. I wasn't needed anymore, until I was missed. There's a difference. A profound difference. I rinsed my teacup in the small sink, dried it with a towel I had bought myself that afternoon, and placed it back on the shelf I had drilled into the wall with my own 2 hands. The following week was a blur of quiet activity. I unpacked the rest of my boxes, finding a place for every book, every photograph, every piece of my life. The tiny studio began to feel less like a temporary shelter and more like a real home. A small, cozy nest I was building for myself. On Tuesday, I made an appointment with a lawyer. Her name was Miss Harrison, a soft-spoken but direct woman whose small office was tucked between a dry cleaner and a flower shop downtown. I didn't go there seeking revenge. I went seeking validation. I brought my ledger and the 3 manila folders bursting with receipts. I laid them out on her polished mahogany desk. She reviewed my notes and receipts without judgment, her expression neutral. She nodded as she flipped through the pages, her pen making small, neat check marks. You kept meticulous records, Mrs. Evans, she said, finally looking up at me over her reading glasses. It was a habit my husband taught me. I replied. A good one, she said. Now, you had no formal lease agreement with your daughter, correct? No. I was just her mother. I understand. Miss Harrison said. But based on these financial contributions, utility payments, capital improvements like the new appliances, consistent funds for groceries and childcare, a strong case could be made that you were a contributing tenant. This status carries certain legal protections. You cannot be evicted without proper notice. For one. The words felt like a balm on a wound I didn't know was still so raw. Legal protections. I wasn't just some old woman they could toss out on a whim. If you want reimbursement for the larger items, she continued, we can draft a formal claim. Or, you can choose to walk away entirely. Legally, the items you purchased are your property. You were within your rights to take them. The choice of how to proceed is entirely yours. I nodded, but I already knew my answer. I hadn't come here for their money. I didn't want a single dollar from them. Taking their money would create a new kind of tie. Another messy string of obligation and resentment. I wanted a clean break. I wanted the dignity they had tried to take for granted. I don't want a claim, I said, my voice clear. I just needed to know I wasn't crazy. You are not crazy, Mrs. Evans, she said with a small, reassuring smile. You are a creditor who has been more than generous. And you have reclaimed your property. I left her office feeling lighter than I had in years. The law was on my side. But more importantly, I was on my own side. That night, I sat down and wrote one last letter. I didn't overthink it. I didn't agonize over every word. I just wrote from the heart. Run. I received your messages. I'm safe. And I will not be coming back. I need you to understand that this was not a decision I made out of anger, but out of clarity. For 3 years, I wasn't just living in your house. I was investing in it. I was investing my time, my money, and my care into your family. You and Niles treated me like a convenient housekeeper when it suited you, and like a burden when it didn't. You saw my contributions not as gifts of love, but as your due. I did not leave because I was hurt, although I was. I left because I finally remembered who I am outside of being your mother and your children's grandmother. I am a person with her own needs, her own desires, and her own right to a peaceful life. You haven't just lost a housekeeper, cook, and a babysitter. You have lost your mother. That cost will not show up on your bank statement, but I promise you, it will be felt in your home. Clara. I folded it neatly, slipped it into an envelope, and dropped it at the post office the next morning on my way to the grocery store. I did not put a return address on it. It was a period at the end of a long, painful chapter. By the time I got back to my apartment, a homemade apple pie was sitting on my doorstep. A note, written in Leota's loopy cursive, was tucked under the foil. It said, "Thought you might need this. See you Thursday. Bring your sass." I smiled. A real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. I unlocked my dormy door and stepped back into my own space, the sweet smell of cinnamon and apples filling the air. This was my life now. It was quiet. It was small. But it was entirely mine. The phone calls had stopped. After my letter, the heavy silence had fallen between us. I didn't know if Taran was angry or ashamed or both. I tried not to think about it. I focused on the here and now. I focused on Thursday night card games, on long walks in the park, on rediscovering the simple pleasure of reading a book uninterrupted for hours. Then, about a week later, another call came. It wasn't Taran. It was Niles. I was so surprised. I answered without thinking. "Clara?" he said, his voice sounding strained. "It's Niles." "I know," I said coolly. "Listen, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," he stammered, "about how things happened. Taran, she was under a lot of pressure. We both were. We didn't handle it right." "No," I said, my voice flat. "You didn't." There was a long, awkward silence. I could hear one of the twins crying in the background. "Her parents," he began. then stopped. It's not what we thought it would be. They're not like you. They don't help. They just sit and criticize. Beth complained that the house wasn't clean enough. He let out a short, bitter laugh. I wanted to tell her it was a lot cleaner a few weeks ago. I didn't say anything. It was not my problem to solve. The thing is, he said, his voice dropping, Taryn misses you. She won't admit it, but she does. The house it's falling apart. Clara. Not just the chores. Everything. We made a mistake. My heart, the foolish, motherly heart I thought I had shielded in armor, gave a painful throb. We made a mistake. The words I had longed to hear for so long. But hearing them now, they felt empty. Too little. Too late. I have to go. Niles, I said, my voice gentle but firm. I'm meeting friends for coffee. Oh, he said, sounding deflated. Okay. Well, take care of yourself, Clara. I am, Niles, I replied. Finally. And I hung up the phone. That Thursday, Camille showed up at my door just before our card game with Leota. She didn't come empty-handed. She was holding a box of cheap red wine, 2 plastic cups she'd snagged from a party, and a grocery bag full of an assortment of crackers and cheese. She looked around my small studio, which was now neat and organized, a place for everything and everything in its place. She nodded with approval. It's cozy, she said, kicking off her shoes and making herself at home on my futon. And it smells like no one's been yelling in it. I laughed, a real, full-bodied laugh that came from my belly. That's because no one has, I said, opening the box of wine. It's one of the perks. We sat on the futon, our feet tucked under us, and toasted our plastic cups like a couple of college girls. We laughed until we wheezed, talking about everything and nothing. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was no clock watching, no mental timer in my head telling me I needed to start dinner or switch the laundry. No one needed anything from me. There were no corrections about the thermostat, no passive-aggressive comments about how I folded the towels, no unspoken tension simmering just beneath the surface. It was just 2 women who had known each other long enough to be completely, comfortably themselves. He called. You know, I said after a while, swirling the dark red wine in my cup. Niles. Camille raised an eyebrow. Oh? And what did the spineless wonder have to say for himself? He said they made a mistake. I recounted, keeping my voice neutral. He said Beth and Richard are not helpful. He said Taryn misses me. Camille snorted. She doesn't miss you, Clara. She misses her free, live-in chef, nanny, and housekeeper. There's a difference. And it only took them 2 weeks to figure it out? They're slower than I thought. Her bluntness was like a splash of cold water, washing away the last lingering vestiges of my sentimental foolishness. She was right. They missed the function I performed, not the person I was. I know, I said, taking a sip of wine. I told him I was busy. Camille grinned, a wide, triumphant smile. That's my girl, she said, tapping her plastic cup against mine. That's the Clara Evans I know and love. Life settled into a new, peaceful rhythm. The days were quiet, but not lonely. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected. I joined a book club at the local library, the place where I had once worked and felt so at home. I spent hours just sitting in the park, feeling the sun on my face, with no agenda other than to enjoy the moment. The hole that Eli's passing had left was still there. It would always be the rebut. It was no longer a raw, gaping wound. It was a space that I was slowly filling with new things, with myself. A few days later, Leota knocked on my door. She was holding a small, hand-stitched pot holder, a cheerful purple floral print with a gold trim. A housewarming gift, she said. pressing it into my hand. Made it back when my hands were steadier. Figured you could use it. I was touched by the simple gesture. It's beautiful. Leota. Thank you. I hung it on the handle of my small oven. It looked perfect there. Felt like something earned. Not expected. It was a gift given freely. With no strings attached. One afternoon, the manila envelope arrived in the mail. It had no return address, but I recognized the careful, blocky printing. It was from Niles. My first instinct was to throw it away, unopened. But curiosity, or perhaps some foolish maternal instinct, got the better of me. I slid it open with my kitchen knife. Inside, there was no letter. Just a crayon drawing taped to a flimsy paper plate. It showed a tiny house with a crooked chimney and smoke curling into a bright yellow sun. In front of the house were 3 stick figures. One was clearly a woman with long, curly hair. The other 2 were small boys, holding her hands. Above the drawing, in the careful, uneven letters of a child first learning to write, it said, Grandma's house. I sank down onto the futon. The drawing clutched in my hand. Tears I didn't know I still had pricked at the back of my eyes. This was Tarun's doing. Of course. Using the boys. My sweet, innocent boys. As messengers. A desperate, calculated attempt to pull at my heartstrings. Damn her. It was working. I pressed the drawing to my chest. My heart aching with a love so fierce it felt like a physical pain. I missed them. I missed their sticky fingers and their goofy laughs and the weight of their small bodies as they snuggled against me for a story. But then I looked around my small, quiet apartment. I looked at the purple potholder hanging on my oven. I thought of the easy laughter I shared with Camille and Leota. I thought of the simple, unburdened peace I felt when I woke up each morning. The love for my grandchildren and the love for myself were at war within me. But for the first time in my life, I knew which one had to win. With a deep, steadying breath, I walked over to my little refrigerator and picked up a magnet, a silly souvenir from a trip Eli and I had taken to Niagara Falls years ago. I smoothed out the paper plate and stuck the drawing to the front of the fridge. The boy's innocent tribute could stay. It was a reminder not of what I had lost, but of the love that was still there. A love that could exist without my sacrificing every last piece of myself on its altar. I no longer had a formal dining room or a master suite or a hallway lined with family photos. But I had peace. And this time, I wasn't just living in the house. I was the owner of the peace inside it. The next day, I went back to the lawyer's office. I've made a decision. Miss Harrison, I said, sitting down across from her. She looked at me expectantly. All right. My daughter and her husband are living in a house where the major appliances, the furnace, the water heater, the washer, dryer, and dishwasher are all legally my property. I have the receipts to prove it. I pushed the folder across the desk. Miss Harrison opened it and scanned the documents. That you do. She confirmed. I don't want the items back. I said. And I don't want their money. But I don't want them to have them. Either. Not as a gift. A slow smile spread across Miss Harrison's face. I think I understand. She said. You want to sell them their house back. Piece by piece. Exactly. I said. I want to draft a bill of sale. For the exact amount I paid for each item. No interest. No markup. Just the original price. They can either pay me in full within 30 days, or I will arrange to have my property removed from their premises. That is perfectly within your legal rights, she said, her eyes twinkling. It's clean. It's fair. And it sends a very clear message. The message was simple. Nothing is free. My help, my support, my love, they had all come at a cost. A cost I had willingly paid. But the cost of my dignity? That was a debt they were now going to have to repay. Miss Harrison drafted the documents that afternoon. They were formal, official, and completely impersonal. An itemized list of assets, their purchase price, and the terms of sale. There was no room for emotional manipulation. No space for pleas or excuses. It was a business transaction, and I was finally treating it as such. The papers were sent via a certified courier the next morning. I imagined the moment the doorbell would ring. I imagined Tarun signing for the envelope, thinking it was perhaps a legal threat or a lawsuit. I imagined the look on her face, on Niles's face, as they read the cold, hard numbers, as they realized that the comfortable life they had taken for granted was built on a foundation of assets that were never truly theirs. They hadn't just lost their mother. They were about to lose their dishwasher, too. And as I sat in my sunny little apartment, sipping my coffee, I felt a sense of profound, liberating power. I wasn't the victim in this story anymore. I was the one holding the receipts. The silence that followed the delivery of the legal documents was heavier, more profound than before. For 3 days, I heard nothing. I imagined the frantic conversations, the panicked calculations happening inside that house. Could they afford it? Could they scrape together nearly $5,000 in 30 days? Based on what I knew of their finances, it would be a monumental struggle. A part of me, the deeply ingrained mother part, felt a pang of something akin to guilt. But I pushed it down. This wasn't about punishing them. It was about teaching them a lesson they should have learned long ago. Actions have consequences. On the 4th day, Tarun appeared at my door. I knew it was her before I even looked through the peephole. The knock was frantic, impatient. Not the polite rap of a neighbor, but the demanding summons of someone who still believed the world revolved around her needs. I opened the door and stood there, blocking the entrance. I didn't invite her in. She looked haggard. Her hair was unwashed, and the dark circles under her eyes were more pronounced than ever. She was holding the legal envelope in her hand, clutching it like it was a snake that had bitten her. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice a harsh whisper. "A bill? You're sending your own daughter a bill? After everything?" "No, Tarun," I said, my voice calm and even. It was amazing how calm I felt. "I'm not sending you a bill for everything. I'm sending you a bill of sale for my property. The property you are currently using. You have 2 options. You can either purchase it from me, or I will have it removed." She stared at me, her mouth agape. Disbelief warred with fury in her eyes. "You can't be serious. The furnace? You'd take the furnace? It's November. Mom, the boys will freeze." "Then I suggest you find a way to pay for it," I replied, my voice unwavering. "You wanted me to be resourceful. I'm simply extending the same expectation to you." The words hit her like a slap. Her face crumpled. The anger dissolved, replaced by a raw, desperate vulnerability. "We don't have that kind of money, Mom," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "You know we don't. Niles's parents, they're taking our savings for a down payment on their future care. We have nothing left." The truth finally came out. Beth and Richard weren't just moving in. They were cashing in. They were securing their own future at the expense of their sons. The irony was bitter. "That sounds like a personal problem, not a legal one," I said, hardening my heart against the sight of her tears. I had shed enough of my own over her. "You have 26 days left to figure it out." "So that's it?" she cried, her voice rising. 3 years of your life. And it all comes down to a bill for a dishwasher? What about us? What about the boys? Don't we mean anything more to you than that? The question, meant to wound me, had the opposite effect. Clarified everything. "You are the one who put a price on my worth, Tarun," I said, my voice quiet but ringing with a strength I didn't know I possessed. "You decided my presence was worth less than the space I occupied. You decided 3 years of my love and labor were a good run that had simply come to an end. I'm not the one who turned our relationship into a transaction. You are. I'm just finally sending you the invoice. I saw the flicker of understanding in her eyes, quickly followed by the shame that flushed her cheeks red. She knew I was right. She opened her mouth to say something else, but no words came out. She just stared at me. This woman who was my daughter. This stranger who had broken my heart. Goodbye. Run, I said softly, and I closed the door. I didn't slam it. I closed it with a gentle, final click. I leaned my back against it, my legs trembling slightly, but my resolve was like steel. The next few weeks were a strange limbo. I half expected Niles to call again, to plead or to bargain, but he didn't. I continued with my new life. I played cards with Leota and the ladies. I went to my book club. I took long, meandering walks just for the pleasure of it. But in the back of my mind, a clock was ticking down. On the final day of the 30-day period, a certified check arrived in the mail. It was for the full amount, down to the last cent. There was no note, no letter of apology, just the check, drawn from a bank I didn't recognize. I realized Niles must have taken out a loan. They had chosen the appliances. They had chosen the debt. They had chosen their pride over a genuine apology. I deposited the check without ceremony. The money sat in my account, a silent testament to the final, severed tie. It wasn't a victory. It felt more like a settlement, the kind you get after a long, painful lawsuit. There were no winners. A few months passed. Winter thawed into a cool, damp spring. My little apartment was truly a home now, filled with my things, my routines, my peace. One Thursday afternoon, as I was getting ready to head down to the rec room for our card game, there was a knock on the door. It was a small, hesitant knock. I opened it to find my two grandsons standing there, alone, Leo and Theo. They were holding a slightly squashed bouquet of dandelions. Behind them, standing at a respectful distance down the hall, was Tarun. She looked different, thinner, tired, but in a different way than before. The frantic energy was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. She didn't approach. She just watched, giving us space. "Hi, Grandma," Theo said, holding out the dandelions. "These are for you." My heart melted. I knelt down, so I was at eye level with them. "Thank you, sweetheart. They're my favorite." "We miss you," Leo said, his little voice serious. "The house is too quiet, and Daddy burns the toast." I smiled. A real, warm smile. "I miss you too. More than you know." Tarun took a tentative step forward. "Mom," she said, her voice quiet. "Niles's parents moved out last month. They found a place closer to the city. It wasn't working." I just nodded, not offering any comment. "The house is me," she continued, her gaze fixed on the floor. "We have the guest room back. It's your room. If you ever wanted to visit, not move back in." The distinction was important. It was a small, fragile olive branch, a recognition that the Izumi apartment, my life, was my home now, and that place was hers. I looked at the hopeful faces of my grandsons. I looked at the broken, remorseful face of my daughter. The anger was gone. The hurt had faded into a dull scar. All that was left was a complicated, messy love. "Maybe I'll come for Sunday dinner," I said, "if you'll have me." A wave of relief washed over her face, so profound it was like watching a storm cloud finally break. "Yes," she said, nodding eagerly. "Yes, of course. I'll make your pot roast. I still have your recipe." I stood up and took the dandelions from Theo, their cheerful yellow heads a splash of sunshine in my hand. I knew things would never be the same. The trust had been shattered, and it could never be fully pieced back together. I would never be their live-in solution again. I was Clara Evans, a resident of Oakwood Suites, a member of the Thursday Night Card Club, and a woman who owned her own peace. But I was also a grandmother. And a mother. And maybe, just maybe, in this new, carefully defined space, with clear boundaries and hard-won respect, we could start to build something new. Not a return to the way things were, but a path forward. A path where love was not an obligation, but a choice. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like a choice I was willing to make.